And that's going to be the crucial meeting, right? He's already kind of seemingly convinced the Indians, or he says he has, to kind of stop buying Russian oil. The second, part of that diplomacy is to get the Chinese to do the same. So in the context of the Ukraine war, it may feel far away, but the meeting with Xi in China is going to be really important.
What's going on in America? Well, a lot happening in America. Also, by the way, in Brussels now, where they're talking about helping out Ukraine by taking billions, hundreds of billions of Russian assets and using those as the basis for a loan to Ukraine. Now, that's going on now. It may go on late into the night, but meanwhile, we've already got an outcome of some thinking in Donald Trump's Oval Office, because he has announced overnight some sanctions on Russian oil. Quite big sanctions, potentially quite important sanctions. And last night, President Trump explained why he had chosen to do that.
These are tremendous sanctions. These are very big. Those are against their two big oil companies, and we hope that they won't be on for long. We hope that the war will be settled. We would like to see them just take the line that has been formed over quite a long period of time and go and let's go home. Last week they had almost 8,000 soldiers killed. Many Russians were killed last week. Many Ukrainians were killed last week. We think it's ridiculous and would like to have it end.
So that was President Trump. And he also, by the way, responded to the Wall Street Journal reporting that his administration, that he had lifted Ukraine's restrictions on using long-range missiles against Russia.
They're not using our missiles. They're using, I think, European missiles or from someplace, but they're not using ours. And what they do, I don't control that, but I do control our missiles. They're not shooting our missiles in. It was a fake story. Wall Street Journal does a lot of fake stories.
So the president distancing himself from the Russian missile attacks into Russia, but embracing the idea of sanctions on Russian oil, which is still an important part of Russia's economy and an important part of Russia funding Putin's war efforts. What did you make of that, Adam? I mean, in one way you could say, look, natural sequence of events. Trump was optimistic about Putin doing a deal, and then Putin and the Kremlin were very clear, no, they're not going to do that. Cue slightly miffed President Trump, and in come sanctions, but still somehow surprising to see the president announcing that kind of action.
Yeah, it is, but I think actually credit goes to the so-called coalition of the willing, which also includes much of the EU and the UK, that they, after that extraordinary second Friday in the Oval Office for Zelensky, when suddenly Putin's phone call was all that mattered and Donald Trump was going to go and have this summit with Putin, they didn't lose their nerve, and they continued to say, well, the war's going on, we continue to support Zelensky, and to suggest that perhaps Putin was playing Trump along, and he appears to have digested that, after that, there was time wasting and that his position wasn't there. So it's certainly a gesture towards his allies who did the same thing on sanctions of oil last week, that he has joined in those. But I think the comments which you mentioned about, they weren't using our missiles and all the rest of it is showing that, if you like, he's back in the centre rather than on Putin's side a little bit as far as these negotiations go. So he's kind of hedging his bets. What he clearly is not yet doing is really throwing all his weight behind behind Zelensky with giving him aid. He's not giving him any aid. I mean, even if he had given him the Tomahawks, we or the Germans would have had to pay for them in the first place. And, what it brings home to me is frankly, Donald Trump's intervention in all this is really not very helpful personally, because he switches around all the time, and what we're seeing is really a failure by him and Rubio and everyone to actually progress to the next stage. And the announcement by Donald Trump that he was going to sanction these two big Russian oil companies, it came at the point where there was really no option of looking at it. I mean, one of the interesting things is he's going to meet with Xi, the Chinese leader, next week in South Korea, and there have been suggestions that he's going to say to the Chinese, stop buying the oil. And he's already said to the Indians, stop buying the oil. Now those are really the main customers now.
For sure.
And if they were to feel pressured into shutting down, then that would be really, really significant.
I mean, Kirsty, how much money would you put on President Xi listening to that and stopping being a sort of, an obvious, but I wouldn't even say discreet, a very obvious supporter of the Russian effort?
I don't have a lot of money for betting, but even if I was as rich as Croesus, I still wouldn't put a healthy bet on it. And actually, what we've seen with Trump, whilst this is a pretty significant intervention by Trump, no doubt about it, he has still stopped short of making these sanctions really effective. To make them really effective, it's not just about sanctioning these two big companies, which are responsible for about 50% of all the exports from Russia. But what you really need to do is impose sanctions on the 8 oil refineries that buy them as well. So you need the secondary sanctions on the refineries in India and China and Turkey for this to really start to bite home. So it's almost like, Trump is still sort of saying to Putin, look, I really don't want to do this. Don't make me do this. So I'll stop short of making it a total nuclear option in the desperate hopes that what everyone says about you isn't true, which is that you are playing for time and you have no inclination to talk about a ceasefire.
We can get the thoughts of George Gryl now, the Washington correspondent for The Times. He's on the line. Hi to you, George.
Good afternoon.
Hi, welcome back to the programme. Good afternoon where you are. Good evening where we are. I mean, after that Trump announcement of the sanctions against the two big Russian oil corporations, the morning after, the day after, how's that being discussed there in Washington, D.C. and by the American media? What are the sort of follow-up questions now?
Well, I think the attention, and Caroline Levitt is speaking right now, is going more towards Asia and towards Trump's trip, which is happening at the end of this week, beginning of next week, where he is due to meet Xi. And that's going to be the crucial meeting, right? He's already kind of seemingly convinced the Indians, or he says he has, to kind of stop buying Russian oil. The second, part of that diplomacy is to get the Chinese to do the same. So in the context of the Ukraine war, it may feel far away, but the meeting with Xi in China is going to be really important.
Yeah, look, I mean, we were discussing it here. What's the best thing there about whether that trip to Asia, that contact with President Xi, such a huge player in this and every other story, is going to bear fruit, George? What's the feeling there?
Well, to be fair, you've started to see, I was reading earlier today on the kind of financial news, wires about China lowering its imports of seaborne crude from Russia, same with India. So there are kind of incipient signs that perhaps this could be leading to a shift in behavior, because you're faced with a choice, basically. Do you want to trade, with the West? Do you want access to dollars, to US financial institutions, or do you want cheap Russian oil? And it's a difficult question that they're basically posing for the Indian and Russian Chinese economies.
And presumably, George, I mean, one of the things that Trump has got to use as leverage against China is the tariffs, of course, and he will be able to say, look, I can cut these in half if you show some signs of reducing your reliance on Russian oil. And China's economy in itself is struggling quite significantly, as is Russia's.
Yeah, but then again, China also has its own pressure points. So, for example, we've seen them impose these massive export controls on rare earth metals, where it basically controls the global supply, which is what led to kind of Trump having another blow up and threatening to raise tariffs back up to nearly 150%, similar to where they were earlier this year. So, this is a back and forth. This is a negotiation. But I do think that the Trump-Xi summit has huge consequences for the Kremlin and will be watched closely by Putin.
And is there any sense from the White House of why he's stopped short of that real hammer blow of allowing Ukraine to use Tomahawks to take out Russian refineries?
Well, bear in mind there was a 2.5-hour call between Putin and Trump previously, and I have no doubt that Putin will have been labouring the point that this constitutes an escalation. Trump has tended to be pretty nervous about getting involved in protracted conflicts, or, he prefers, like in Iran, to go in, do a big intervention, or the assassination of Soleimani, if you remember from his first term, and then get out again. And, dialing it up and ratcheting up tensions and getting involved in some sort of protracted American involvement in Ukraine, I don't think he had on the cards. I mean, bear in mind, he said he wanted to solve the conflict within 24 hours of entering the White House. He wants this done and dusted, move on to the next thing. So I think he would regard that as, if anything, kind of extending the war rather than, wrapping it up.